Hey everybody, it's Flake again for Team Rankstar. I'm here with another deck for you to give a whirl with. Last time we tried Nilfgaard and stuck to a Jan Calvate Witcher's build. This time we're going to go with everyone's favorite leader, that being, of course, Usurper. Now, this is a leader that a lot of people are on the fence about, a lot of hatred. Some people defending him, of course, you know, someone who does nothing himself but stops your opponent's leader from doing stuff is a very hot button issue within Gwent. But I built a list for those of you brave enough to try them and receive all the hate mail that ensues. So let's give a whirl with a Shutdown Usurper list. All right, so the Usurper list is pretty much one that bases its strategy on shutting down your opponent's strategy and giving them no real basis for their cards to synergize or for their leaders to have any effect on the game at all. Obviously, the Usurper leader nullifies your opponent's leader altogether, making them have no effect on the game or the outcome of the game or any gameplay at all. You yourself are then sort of trading the fact that you have no leader for your opponent having no leader, relying solely on the cards themselves to do the talking for you. So the Usurper deck that I put together is sort of adds on to that flavor of complete shutdown in order to give yourself a victory with some cards that invested points down the line. So later on, once your opponent's completely frustrated, if he has not forfeited just yet, will then succumb to cards that have kind of had some points banked on them and some bigger bombs down the road. Now let's just cruise through this real quick here, and I'll start with the bronzes this time. Last time I started with the golds. We're gonna start with the bronzes, and we'll go with some cards that we have seen in previous Nilfgaard lists because the value on them is just really incredible. Of course, the Magni Division over here, a card that when left on the row alone will grow by 1 at the end of the turn. No real, exceptional amounts of explanation needed for this one. It's a bronze card for 4 provision, super cheap, comes down at 3. Put them on a row, think ahead as to what row that you're going to slap them down on based on the cards you have in hand, and essentially this card's just going to go there and grow and grow and grow. Worst case, it eats a lock or a removal spell, and hey, you've traded 4 provisions for a card that probably costs 4 provisions from your more than 4 provisions from your opponent. Magni Division is a easy bronze inclusion every time. Similar to the Magni Division Nausicaa Sergeant, make sure that with this card you're putting it on a row that isn't within the same row as your Magni Division. But basically, anytime you play a card with deploy, and this deck has plenty of them, it'll grow by 1. You know, another snowbally kind of card that gets you some value down the road, and easy peasy, right? Basically, this is probably going to be one of your cards that you want to slap down early as well. So it'll either, again, eat a removal card or a lock, and worst case scenario, again, 4 provision trading up for removal is a fair trade in my books. Okay, so now we get to the meat of the deck, which is the thematic engine to it, which is lockdown, shutdown, and stopping your opponent from doing good things. And one of those great cards that we're going to work with are the Alba Armored Cavalry. Lock is exceptionally important in New Gwent, and I've sort of been beating this drum for a while now and saying that lock is really kind of like your new Alzur's Thunder in the sense of it's good, great removal. You're going to need this in droves, and they've printed a lot of lock in this game, and you're going to need every little bit of it. So Alba Armored Cavalry is a 5 provision 3 drop. But in reality, I mean, you're deploying it on the melee row to lock a unit. So all their engine pieces are going to get shut down, and they're probably going to have more. Engine-heavy decks will have 6 to 8 cards that really have orders or have some type of synergy. So you'll never have enough locks to lock them down. So what you're hoping for is that you're locking enough of the important pieces so that down the road, they're not going to have enough snowball effects from all those synergizing, because you've essentially cut enough pieces of that intricate web that it won't be as strong and structurally sound to beat you in a round. So it's going to be tough to generate points with this deck, so you're going to kind of have to play with a strategy I'll talk to you about a little bit later in the guide here. But this is one of your pieces that are going to be shutting down your opponent and frustrating the hell out of them. Similarly, we're going to go down to a card like Slave Driver. Now, Slave Driver itself, 2 strength for 4, not all that fantastic. Damage an enemy by 2. All right, that's no problem. 2 is not going to really kill anything, but the great part about it is that you're going to get some extra value with the locks down the road. Increase damage by 1 for each locked unit. Well, we have a bunch of locks in this deck, so you're going to get some extra value off of this card. So think of it more of a later game removal or later in the round. Counter locks, 1 lock on the board is good. 2 is going to be great. If you can get 3 or more, fantastic. But I mean, if you can, you want to kind of play this either at a strategic point where 2 points really does matter, or you want to hang on to it if you have locks in hand to play it later down the line. You know, because 4 provision, for 2 points plus 2 damage is not really all that fantastic. It's once you sort of add in the lock bonuses that this is going to get some better value for the 4. But again, you want powerful cards, you got to be able to wedge in some 4 provision cards. So I'm putting some cards in here that have the potential to be worth a lot more. All right, moving along, Dime Shackles. Now, Dime Shackles is okay for 5 provisions, lock a card, deal 3 damage. I mean, it's not fantastic, but we wanted to add some more locks in here, and I couldn't fit them in elsewhere. Now, I played it without this extra lock, and I thought that maybe I needed a little bit more shutdown because, again, Usurper doesn't necessarily generate you points that easily. So you want to be able to keep your opponent's strategy in check so that you yourself can later on sort of wheel and deal late game and not be worried about snowbally type cards that grow out of control. Usurper decks, at least the way I play them, are really like the ultimate disruption deck. That is where you're going with. It's not just a matter of shutting down a leader, it's also a matter of shutting down all the bronzes and golds that can lead your opponent to winning a round and ultimately the game. You're oftentimes are going to be sneaking away with a win in a round by 1 or 2 points. You're not going to run away with any rounds, so Usurper decks are pretty difficult to play, especially against decks that really snowball points. But I figured that the more locks the better, and this is one that I was able to sort of wedge in, which was okay. So I put Dime Shackles in here and wasn't too upset. Just 1 copy of it, so it's not a huge deal. Now, further on, I put in Assassination. Damage the unit by 6, increase the damage by 1 for each unit adjacent to it. You're never going to be removing too many cards. Lock versus removal is what the flavor of this deck is. So they're going to be putting a lot of cards on the board. You're going to lock them down, no big deal. It's all good. However, damaging the units by 6, and with there's 2 next to it by 8 is pretty decent. 8 removal for 6 provision is okay. I'm not all that upset about it, but there's going to be times when you run out of locks but you just want to remove a card altogether or damage a card. If a card has the game text, the flavor of being the biggest unit on the board, this will sort of solve that to a degree. Keep your opponent's units in check. 1 copy of Assassination is great. It's fine, no problem. I've had a lot of fun with this card. I've had uses for it. I mean, it's just a removal card with a higher ceiling than a standard Alzur's Thunder. Now, moving onward now, everybody is talking about the fact that there's so many artifacts and there's so much pain in the ass. There's debates going on about Sea and is it overpowered? Is it good for the game? Is it not? I honestly have no problem with Sea because Sea can sit on the board and be taken care of by a 4 provision Dime Bomb. Now here's a Bomb Heaver, which actually gives you some points. Now points as a Usurper player are exceptionally valuable because you're not generating too many of them early on. So a card like Bomb Heaver is fantastic because it not only destroys your opponent's artifact, be it Sea or a trap or whatever, but it also generates 4 points of board presence for you. Awesome, great, no problem, right? And 6 provision, so really you're paying 4 provision for the artifact removal and 2 provision for the 4 points. Hey, package deal, no problem. We fit it in 2 copies because you're going to be wanting to deal with those kinds of traps and stuff like that. Traps and artifacts you can't lock, but Bomb Heavers will take care of them. And finally, in the bronze category is a good favorite card of mine. Probably one of my favorite cards right now is the Viper Witcher. Now, Viper Witcher from Old Gwent was a awful card and brought terrible memories to so many people, but the new iteration of it is actually pretty good. Deploy and reveal the top card of your opponent's deck and banish it. This was in my previous Witcher deck as well, and for good reason, because you can honestly just drop this down on a round 2 if you've won round 1. On a throwaway round, you play this and you're never going to go wrong because you're planning typically to lose that round anyways, so why not get some extra value from or why don't you get some, potential high rolls and really disrupt your opponent's late game strategy. If they're planning on drawing something big, they thin down and they think that they're going to get something good in their draws, play Viper Witcher and banish something big. And I've hit some big banishments with this card, and it always feels great. And worst case is you banish a bronze, who cares? I mean, like, it's gone. They can't res it. So Viper Witcher, another winning card. 6 provision, 4 cost. It's like your Bomb Heaver in terms of value, but you're banishing a future threat versus Bomb Heaver, which is just getting rid of a artifact. All right, now to the meaty part of the deck. We saw a lot of little, core pieces over here. Sort of the, the sidekicks to the main hero, which are your gold pieces. Now, this deck's strategy essentially is to shut down your opponent and keep up slightly with the pace of play from a tempo perspective in round 1, so that late game you might bleed them down in the second round, and then later on in round 3 you're dropping some bigger bombs once they're not ready for them. How do you do that? Well, easy. You invest points. In round 1 to be played in round 2. How does that happen? Well, here's a card that I haven't seen many people play that I've actually pretty much enjoyed. So King of Beggars. King of Beggars, every turn on turn end, boosts the lowest unit in your hand by 1. Now, if you do this properly, you can sort of, boost up some of your bronzes, meaning that if you play them in round 1, you'll be able to catch up, or you'll be, boosting up some other cards, such as Ihuaraquax, or, Ox, or other, Serret, or Siridash, or whatnot, or your Viper Witchers, or Bomb Heavers, or whatnot. You're getting some value, and nobody was just going to dry pass round 1 once you play it. So play it early, get some value off of it, and because you're going to need those points that it accrues over time in later games. In later rounds. I've had some good return off King of Beggars when I draw it. A lot of people don't typically think it's too much of a threat early on. They might drop a lock for it, but a lot of people are more wary for other locks. This is kind of a low value lock in my opinion, because a lot of people typically play against Usurper and feel confident that they can outpace with points, so they don't necessarily need to lock a 4-point here. They think that maybe my points are coming off of other characters, and we'll get to that in a second. So here are one of those investment cards like King of Beggars, which is going to get you some points for future rounds. Another one that I like in the disruption category is Frenzied Dow. 8 provision, 7 strength. Okay, so you got a body to put down on the board. You got some catch-up points to play. And then the cherry on top is destroying enemy artifacts. So that's 3 iterations of artifact destruction. I think that's fair, depending on what you're playing. If you're playing against an Ethne artifact kind of trap deck, you will get outpaced. They will have a lot more artifacts than you have things to stop them. You just got to make sure that you're using in the right spot. Test out their traps, test out what they're throwing down on the board. If you see a Sea Hill, that's as good as it's going to get in terms of artifact crushing. So make sure that you use these properly. If not, it's 7 strength to throw down. I would throw this down if it meant stealing a round with the right amount of cards in your hand. So don't be too attached to it, but you want to get the right targets with this. 7 points on the board is nothing to scoff at. Of course, we have Ox and the partner there, Serret. Serret and Ox come as a duo. Serret says to damage an enemy by 3. If Ox is in your hand, damage an enemy by 5 instead. And Ox is the really the spice of the deck, and the thematic punch, which is lock an enemy unit. If Serret is in your hand, lock all copies of that, be it on the board, in hand, or in deck. So really, you want to be using Ox with Serret in hand. I explained this in my previous video, but again, with the theme of the deck, 5 damage is great and all, and you could use it in a pinch if you need it, but I mean, judge what the situation is. If you don't suspect your opponent has too many cards that are lock worthy, then use Serret first. But if you have Ox and you're seeing a lot of cards that have abilities, orders, etc., drop Ox, lock 2. You're not going to regret it. It also then plays into your Slave Driver, which gets extra bonus on its damage as well. So we're up to a lot of locks in this deck, and I really love it because lock is awesome, especially in a Usurper deck. So Ox is going to get you plenty of value. So again, how are we winning this? Is it just a matter of playing King of Beggars onto small cards for point value later on? Are we really just going to play disruption cards? I'll tell you that in a second. Before I get to Treherne Varvidifir, you know, the guy who is, you know, I don't even know what to say. This is like the buy a vowel nightmare in Wheel of Fortune until you get to his last name. Anyway, deploy. Look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck and move 1 to the graveyard. It's a 4-drop for 6 provision, but it gives you options to look at what they got coming up in round 3 or round 2, etc. And you get to pick and choose one of those cards and wave bye-bye to it. So if you see one of the Witcher trio, wave goodbye. If you see one of their obvious, you know, main engine pieces or a huge bomb gold, wave it goodbye. I love tossing out a renew with this card and just, you know, saying adios. I love, you know, crushing big golds with this card. Otherwise, it's just fun to play and, you know, and throw away one of their bronzes that they feel like they're going to use and get some value off of. 4 for 6 is, or 4-drop for 6 is essentially within your Witcher category of value. So the only difference is Witcher Chop takes the top off and banishes it. This you get to choose 3 and drop 1 in the discard pile. So it's a cheap drop. And you can't really play this at a bad time. I mean, 3rd round is not ideal, but 1st round or 2nd round, this could also be something that you throw away in the 2nd round if you don't need to win it, or if you need to just drop a card off a dry pass. You can't go wrong with this card right here. Furthermore, let's get to a little bit more of the more complex synergies of the deck, or some of the aspects that can give you a win. There's some magic cards in here that I really, really like. I got turned on to Eskel Pathfinder as a card that can keep you in around easy peasy. Now, we saw Magni Division, which drops in the on the board, and if it's in a row by itself, it grows by 1. Well, this Eskel Pathfinder has the same exact strategy of growing by 1 every turn. However, all it needs to do is satisfy the condition of being in the melee row. So you drop it in the melee row with your Magni Division in the ranged row, and they both grow by 1 point each every turn. If you do this early in round 1 and they have no answer for it, congratulations, you've just grown 2 points a turn, and you're going to keep pace with a lot of your opponent's shenanigans. You know, 6 strength to 6 drop, you know, off of a 10 provision seems crazy, but keep in mind you're getting it 7 right off the bat, and then you know, if they don't answer it, they don't answer it. It's going to be well in your favor. This has grown up to 11, 12 in the past for me, and you know, 12 points off of 10 is great, and it just gets out of control because it's something that your opponent also has to think about down the road. You know, how long do I want to stay in this round? You know, adds a few extra variables to the math that they do moving forward. Now, I really like this card because it's easy tempo that you just drop down and not have to worry about. There's no combo pieces to it. It's good for Usurper in the sense that it generates and grows points for you without any real setup. So I like it. And again, if it eats a removal, it has to be a pretty fat removal because 6 points to get rid of is pretty difficult. And that said, it might eat a lock, but sure, no problem. Again, that you can't play in fear of your opponent's locks, because if you're playing in fear of your opponent's locks, you're never going to drop these cards. So you either play them early or don't play them at all, because living in fear is just as easy as not playing it. So make sure you get the proper value off of this card. Now, moving forward, another card that's going to get you some advantage. So you've seen this one before, is Siri Dash. After 4 turns, on turn start, draw a card. Now, the draw card is not the end of the world, but with Usurper and the lack of tempo that it typically offers, you might go down 2 cards. Now, that's not the end of the world. I've played this game where I've gone down 2 cards to win a round before and never really recouped that advantage. But this card coming down gives your opponent a little bit of thinking to do in terms of their removal, or what do I do with this, or, you know, they might actually overpay to remove this because they fear that extra card, but that extra card is going to be a big deal. Now, there's no huge bombs in this deck, but an extra card in a Usurper deck can actually do the difference for you. So play this with 5 cards left in hand, not 4, 5, and then she'll draw an extra card for you, and you'll have last say plus a little extra spice to sort of put you over the top late game. But you know, she eats a lock or she eats a removal. You know, again, don't play in fear. Play the card with 5 cards left. It's the only time to do it, really, unless there are very few circumstances where she's just coming down as a 5-drop because you need to remove something. but I can't call, I can't prognosticate absolutely every scenario. I'm just saying that 4 out of 5 times she's coming down with 5 cards left, and you sort of have to let your opponent decide how he wants to deal with it. Okay, so what about the fun cards, the cool cards? Well, Yennefer's Invocation is one of them that is going to put some thinking in your opponent's head as to what the hell is he doing, right? So Yennefer's Invocation is an 11 cost spell that says choose any unit or artifact on the battlefield and place it on top of your owner's deck. Well, in round 3, there's very few instances where your opponent is going to draw an extra card. Now, 11 cost to remove anything is pretty good, because Scorch, I believe, costs 11 or 12. This is a directed sort of removal spell. So whatever that they're building up, whatever huge card that they've invested in for 5-6 turns already that has grown to abnormally huge proportions, can be nullified by Yen's Invocation. Of course, if it's immune, it's a different story. But if they're dropping something that is just absolutely enormous, you are just saying thank you for your time, see ya in round 4, which obviously doesn't exist, so you're just putting it on top of their deck. Now, there's very few occasions where you want to use this in a round 1 or 2 scenario, but one of those would be if you pair this up, let's say, with a Viper Witcher, because you're putting this card on top of their deck, and then if you play Viper Witcher, the top card gets banished. So there's a cool little synergy over there, and that'll really piss them off. If you really are fighting for a round, or you can afford to play 2 cards, do it. Play your Viper Witcher if it's going to win you the round, and just watch them squirm. Now, the other synergy that this has is with our good friend Tibor. Now, 13 points is where you're going to win rounds, because 13 points is enormous in New Gwent. And deploy summon your opponent's top unit from their deck to a random row. So the fun part about Tibor is that you can kind of have a little bit of say into what that card is, right? Because with Yennefer's Invocation, you can choose whatever their smallest, weeniest, crappiest card is, throw it on top of their deck, and then go ahead, play Tibor, and you know that the Tibor card that's going to hit is going to be pretty small. Now, a lot of times that is just a bronze unit that they play that has some type of synergy that has grown and grown and grown. I played this card against Scoia'tael, where they've sort of boosted one unit up, one bronze unit with like base strength 2 or 3, that they've grown to 8 or 9. Now, you Yen Invocation, put it on top, Tibor, and you're good, because it negates the boost that card had, and then you Tibor, put it on, beautiful. So Yen's Invocation has various different applications. On its own, it's good, especially in round 3. But you can kind of use it to guarantee a decent Tibor, and you can use it as well with Viper Witcher to frustrate your opponent in an early round. But it can also be used if with Cantarella. Now, if there's a card that you think is going to be looking real spicy on your side of the board, you can Yen's Invocation, put it on top of the deck, and then play Cantarella to play that card from the top of their deck. Let's say there's a card that's looking pretty sexy. You say, you know what, we're going to Yen's it, and then Cantarella's going to go and whisper it over to your side, and your opponent will be pissed. I have played this before. It is a fantastic combo, so there's definitely a lot of say for playing Yen's Invocation, because there's now 3 options that you can pair it up with to give it a little bit of extra juice, right? So Cantarella, play the top card from your opponent's deck, and you can pick and choose what the hell that card is with Yen's Invocation. They're expensive cards, Yen's Invocation costing 11, Tibor costing 10, etc. But it's a great piece. So here's the other part. The last card, Ihwaraquax, which in itself is, again, a Wheel of Fortune nightmare. Is a deploy on the melee row. Each player summons the unit with the highest recruit cost from their deck to the melee row, and range row is summoned onto the lowest recruit to the range row. So who is she getting? Well, Ihwaraquax is 11 provision, pretty fat, 4 cost, and what is she getting for you? Well, she's getting you either Eskel, which is going to grow and be pretty, or Tibor, which is going to drop to the front of the deck, to the melee row, and pull your opponent's card out of the deck and whatnot. Now, that is kind of a little bit of unfair advantage, because Ihwaraquax is going to grab a 13-point card, and your opponent is going to drop another big card, and who knows, because there's a lot of fat cards that a lot of expensive cards that don't have as much strength as Tibor has at 13. Keep in mind that it's not going to play your opponent's summon ability or their deploy ability. It's just going to hit the board and do absolutely nothing. So it's just going to hit there. So if it has a cool big summon ability, which essentially equates to why it has a big provision cost, it's nullified. So typically you're going to get a 4 cost or a 4 or 5 strength unit that does nothing. Like let's say it's Geralt Igni, which comes on the board at what, 3 or 4 strength, but it's super expensive. It's going to hit the board and it's not going to burn nothing because it's literally just going to be settling there and doing nothing. Not to mention, let's say your opponent was waiting to play a Royal Decree to pull that card out of your deck. Pull that Igni out of the deck, it no longer can. So you've kind of disrupted a little bit of that synergy as well. So I like that. And in worst case, you're playing Eskel Pathfinder. So the way to play a Huaraquax in this case is essentially, if you have Tibor in hand, play your Huaraquax early to play your Eskel out of your deck and let it grow. Or if you have Eskel already in hand, use it as a late game strategy, so you're playing it as kind of a 17-point bomb plus whatever your opponent digs out of their deck. Usually this is going to come back well in your favor. Very rarely is this going to haunt you, but in a lot of times in Gwent, you're kind of waiting for that one moment where you kind of get screwed off of a bad draw or whatever. Regardless, this is the deck that is so frustrating to play against. Oftentimes I've played this deck and had just random forfeits after the fact. They realize that, you know, I'm locking stuff and they can't really get their engine going. And a lot of times just Yenne's Invocation removing their cards and Tibor hitting the you know, the battlefield and not really giving my opponent much. They kind of catches them by surprise. So a lot of shutdown, a lot of synergy disruption, and definitely a lot of frustration from your opponent, which really, you know, if played properly, can translate to a decent win rate. I've won more games than I've lost with this deck. I wouldn't say that it's a tier 1 deck. I'm saying it's something different, and it's something to give you a little bit of more experience with Usurper. Because, of course, the poor guy's gotten such a bad rap lately, and there's a possibility we won't see him for long. So might as well get your licks in while you can. So here it is, Usurper, the hate mail deck. And prepare for some forfeits and some angry messages. So there it is. There's the Usurper deck. And again, I really, really want you to try Usurper and maybe understand what the deck's about before we drop truckloads of hate on it. I had a lot of fun playing it. Of course, my opponents probably didn't, but you know what? I'm not them, so who cares, right? I do wish that you guys kind of broaden your perspective and just understand the flavor of this leader and what he's about before we just dump loads of hate on him. I had fun with this deck. My opponents definitely did not. But yeah, if you have any more suggestions or questions, please feel free. Drop them in the comments section of this video, and I'll definitely go ahead and answer some. You can also ask me in person. You can tweet at me at WatchFlake on Twitter, or catch me on Twitch. That would be twitch.tv/WatchFlake, and I'm always more than happy to answer your questions. Or you can check out more of my articles and more of my videos at teamrankstar.com. Again, for Team Rankstar, I am Flake, and be kind to one another, and I will catch you very soon. Adios.